Our first presentation is titled A Framework for Micro-Credentials Development. And this is given by Mr. Adrian Lipsett from Vancouver Community College. We hope you're not too tired and jet-lagged coming from Vancouver to Doha. And I would like to introduce Mr. Adrian. Mr. Adrian Lipsett is currently the Dean of Continuing Studies at Vancouver Community College. He has spent roughly 15 years in the post-secondary sector, specializing in instruction, program design, and leadership. Currently, Adrian is spearheading initiatives at VCC with a keen focus on micro-credentials, digital badging, rapid program development, and fostering collaboration opportunities across British Columbia. I like the word rapid program development here. So without further ado, let's welcome Adrian Lipsett to the stage as he shares his insights on the framework. Please, Mr. Adrian.
I'm assuming my chest lights up with sound. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me. Realizing my water bottle is going to slide down the entire presentation, won't it? So I am. It is a pleasure to be here. I am fully conscious. It was a very long travel day yesterday, but it's really an honor to be here, and thank you for welcoming me. As I was introduced, my name is Adrian Lipsett. I'm the Dean of Continuing Studies at Vancouver Community College. I'm also a mover around the stage, so please forgive me, but that goes back to my days of instruction a few decades ago. But this is a topic that I am so absolutely thrilled by. It is something that is occupying a lot of my time and focus in my work, and I'm really excited to share with you what we've been doing. With the hopes that this would be helpful for you in your own explorations here at UDST. Before I get too far into it, I just want to also note that this is a shot actually very, very similar to what I left on early this week. But we are located, Vancouver Community College has been located on the traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. And if you are from Vancouver, you'll recognize the names of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations who have been stewards of that land. My office is at the very bottom of this photo. It's down there, but if you ever happen to wake up and find yourself in Vancouver, I do encourage you to reach out to me by email, and I'd love to show you around the city. It's really a beautiful, beautiful place, and a real privilege to be able to work there. This, if you pop on a seaplane from here, from downtown at the harbor downtown, and you go about 20 minutes over to the west, you're going to end up with something that we call like the Gulf Islands. Has anyone ever been in Vancouver before? I'm seeing some hands. Yes. Oh, wow. Great. Have you done the seaplane tours around? It's so beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. It's a little scary the first time in a seaplane when you're landing because it looks like you're going to crash, but you do end up landing. This is a gorgeous little spot on the way to Vancouver Island, which is fairly close by. And I took this picture just a few weeks ago. I was over in Victoria visiting another institution and talking about collaboration, as one does. And when I was looking out the window, I mean, it's obviously a stunning little place, but as I've been preparing to talk with you here today, this particular image actually really reminded me of some of the kind of a mind shift or a perspective shift when we're talking about developing a micro-credential framework. So you'll see that there's a lot of small little islands. Like if they look at the very top right, there's a little tiny winky little island up there, and I can just imagine some things are very popular in Canada where my brother actually did this. He went off into the woods and built himself a little shelter. You can imagine someone on an island like that building out a little shelter and just thinking, yes, this is the total encompassment of my world. I am here, I'm alone, I'm isolated on my island, I can do everything on my island. Without recognizing that that island is actually part of a larger chain, the Gulf Islands. that the Gulf Islands are actually part of a larger region, the southwest coast of British Columbia. British Columbia is a much larger province. And so there's this shift that I think we have to take when we're really thinking about how any particular initiative that we undertake is one part of a larger picture. So I could, if I wanted to, develop micro-credentials from within the scope of my own little area of continuing studies at Vancouver Community College. But if I had done that, if I had just developed micro-credentials from within continuing studies, my one little area, then I would be lacking the perspective that's actually required to think about what the work I do, how it fits into the work of our institution, how the work of our institution fits into the entire sector, all the other 25 institutions across our province, how our province fits into the country, and et cetera, et cetera. So I want to encourage you to keep that perspective in mind, that when I'm talking about this, I'm really talking about how the micro is nested within the macro, how we need to be thinking, yes, of designing something or creating something. We have to really focus in on it and be intentional about it, but we can't lose perspective of what is also beyond. And it's the beyond that we're going to be talking about. So I'm really excited just to jump into this with you. We're going to be reviewing a few things this morning. I'm going to be talking about the micro-credential framework that we developed at our institution. I'm going to be talking about the rapid development approach that we use to actually implement and carry out micro-credentials at our institution. And then I'm going to take that step back with you all to look at evaluating what worked and what didn't. And my hope here for you all is that in some way this will be helpful for you. That's the reason why I was so excited when Dr. Hiba reached out to me. I was very excited to come and talk to you because I tend to be a person who's very open with, yes, this was very successful, and boy, we really messed up over here. And it's really important because we can learn from both of those things. It's important to see both sides. So I'll be very openly sharing what did not work with you this morning, as well as what worked, and in the hopes that this is helpful for your own conversations here at UDST. So a little context. When we started with micro-credentials, how many have run micro-credentials or are familiar with micro-credentials? Let's start with that question. How many are familiar with micro-credentials here? Okay, fantastic. Has anyone taught in a particular, like a designated micro-credential? Yeah, okay, great, okay. So, okay, that's good to know. In 2019, so just a few short years ago, we at Vancouver Community College were about in the same boat. We had heard about micro-credentials. We had been at conferences, we'd read papers, we'd talked to colleagues across, and it seemed like everyone was, at least in our area, everyone else was doing micro-credentials in some way. Well, interestingly, there was a lot of different perspectives about what micro-credentials were. If you asked a person over here, they would say, oh, it's short focus training, absolutely. Someone over here, it's like, it is 2 hours of training online only. That's a micro-credential. Really? How do we find our own way in this? Our province, British Columbia, that western part of Canada, well, the lower western part of Canada, was also investigating the question. And problematically in 2019, all they said to us was, yes, we're investigating the question. We don't have anything published right now, but we're looking into it, if you will. So we were left with, well, what do we do with that? How do we navigate these waters? And so in 2019, our VP academic formed a small group, about 4 people across the institution, and asked them to look into it, and that's essentially where we began our investigation of micro-credentials at VCC. To do that, what we did is we began with a few questions, and I'm realizing the laser needs a line of sight, doesn't it? Hiya, hiya. There we go. Okay, there we are. So we actually started with a few quite kind of guiding questions to help us with our inquiry. So these are deceptively simple, but I'd actually say the simplicity is actually quite helpful. So what are micro-credentials? Again, there's a lot of different definitions. Even today, in the literature, you'll find tons of definitions, different perspectives about what micro-credentials are. More importantly, how are they actually useful? So whatever we define them to be, how are they going to be useful for our context? And then how can they be effectively implemented? And that from a sustainability perspective, but also from like an efficiency perspective. So we had, thankfully, some guiding questions to really help us focus our investigative work. And then that turned our mind to two particular areas where we thought we could really make a difference by taking some steps forward. And that's in both programming principles related to micro-credentials, and also just the technical, like, what is the structure of a micro-credential? So again, just for the context, I'm going to be sharing with you what we did. It doesn't mean that this is the way, the de facto way. There are different institutions across British Columbia, even in my region, that do it somewhat different. But what we outline here actually is something that is very consistent across our area. Okay, so we're going to be looking at, I want to walk through both the programming principles with you and then also some of the structural questions. So, importantly, I think the first point that I outline here, starting with the student in mind. This is of utmost importance. We thankfully did this. I would note that this actually wasn't one of our stated principles at the outset. It was what we call the hidden outcome, if you will, or the subtext of the particular initiative. But we at VCC, like we have we've been a community college. I think we're actually the oldest community college in our region. And as such, we tend to start from that perspective. So it was kind of like an underlying value, but it was really important. Like, why would a student want to do this? Why is a micro-credential of more value than a course? Why is it of more value or of unique value compared to a short certificate, a certificate or diploma? Like, what does it add to the student? Great, it's a great question. It's a great thing to kind of get you focused in on what the work ahead might be. They should also be recognized and endorsed. These were some of the kind of the key principles that we saw, again, from conversations that we heard. We were just pulling pieces from what we heard from others that we thought this would be a good thing to have in there as we design our micro-credentials out. So recognized and endorsed, meaning that we're actually looking at training students on acquiring skills, competencies, knowledge, and that is actually something that is linked in some way to our community or to how that might help them further their work in the community. Endorsed, of course, that means that we wanted to make sure that the college was behind this, that our name was on this. It wasn't just a micro-credential, it was a VCC micro-credential. It had to be valid and high quality. Yeah, one would assume, of course, we'd want it to be valid and high quality. But if we actually think about that, the validation comes from who is saying this is important. And this is one of the things that we wanted. We knew that this is, in the next slide we'll go over it, short and focused training, absolutely. But it gives you an opportunity to really go, again, what's the value to the student? Well, we'd want to make sure that there's some way that the students can actually use this learning out in the world in a different way that certificates or larger, like diplomas or degrees, fail to do, just because of the scope. So if we can really narrow the scope, can we actually have industry back us up on this? Can we work with industry to do this? And in terms of high quality, can it work within our own quality assessment work that we already, like the policies and the procedures that we already have in place? Verifiable and digitally accessible. This is one where, again, if we have the students acquiring content, we want to make sure that when they go out into the field, that the people that are hiring them and are looking for the student having acquired this, that they would say, yes, oh, you've acquired that one? Perfect. And that means that you're the right candidate for my particular place. Digitally accessible has been a little bit hard on our end, and I'll get to that at the end of the presentation. But the ideal is that badges, digital badges, are also a very common component of micro-credentials, at least in the Canadian context. The idea is that we're in a sector where, in British Columbia, where we have a long history of institutions having our articulated courses back and forth. So if you have like a first-year sociology course or an economics course, if you take that at institution A, a student can actually transfer over to institution B, and institution B will recognize those credits, right? So we have a long history of that, and we wanted to make sure that micro-credentials would also be able to work within that as well. Customizable and flexible. We're thinking again of like shorter, micro is the key word there. So we want to make sure that we can actually leverage the small form of this as much as possible. How can we make sure that the shape of a micro-credential could actually work in a multiplicity of ways, that it could adopt features that's useful in one context and maybe relinquish those features in a different context. Responsive is a very key feature of this. We want to make sure that, like, if again, it's a short, focused training. This is not a business degree. This is not a well-established economics degree. This is something new, novel, short. So we have to make sure that we can respond. The micro-credentials should be able to respond to the changing needs of industry, the changing needs of our community. And then, of course, mission-focused. As I mentioned just a little bit ago, VCC has a long history of connecting with our community, of making sure that what we teach is relevant to them. And so we had that broad mandate, but we did not have a mission that actually said, yes, VCC must run micro-credentials. There's nothing like that. There was nothing like that in our mission statement or our strategic planning. So we had to mold this initiative in alignment with the established mission. So structural considerations, and again, these vary by institution for sure, but this is what we found were going to be kind of like the fundamental principles, the fundamental structural components that would be helpful for us when we're crafting micro-credentials. So first, we wanted to make sure that we're assessing the students' learning. That it's not just a, hey, you showed up to class today. Here's you got a micro-credential. Congratulations. And some institutions do that, by the way, so I guess I shouldn't be disparaging in my comments, but we were like, I think the real value, again, if we're talking about what the student is going to take forward, it needs to be more than a participation badge. This has to be something where we're actually assessing, and we're assessing competencies because that is part of the validation of the competencies earned. We chose to cap off our microcreds at 100 hours. Some institutions would do this differently. Our province actually has a max cap at 288 hours. We chose a smaller cap for this for a few reasons. Number one, 288 hours already got into the way of existing credential policy at our institution. So, which is the next point, so I'll just put a pin in that for a hot second. But the other component is that 100 hours, really, if you think about it, like we're looking at short, focused training. A lot of our audience we're looking at people who are already working in some way, or who want a career change. So we're looking at reskilling people, or we're looking at upskilling people. So we're saying, okay, you're in a field, but that field is changing. That's the world a micro-credential can evolve in, right? Because I'm not going to retrain you on the whole component of what you're already doing. We're just saying you need to adapt to this particular new feature in this field. So that's where a micro-credential can really add value to the student. But if that person's already working, then they're not going to be able to take 4 days of classes every week. They can't, they take vacation time for a whole semester? That doesn't make any sense. So if we keep it at 100 hours, then what we can do is we can run it in a 15-week semester, maybe 2 evenings a week. We could run it online. The student could complete this at their own pace during a particular component of time. So this gives the flexibility that we were really hoping for. Fitting within an existing credential policy, I don't know how policy changes at UDST work, but they are laborious and slow at my institution. They will take, if someone's like, oh, let's change our credential policy. That's a 3-year process, and if we had said, you know what, let's change our credential policy to work around micro-credentials, we'll create something new, then I would not be here talking with you today, and what a loss for us all. But it would be it would be something that we wouldn't be able to get anything off the ground. So it made far more sense for us to actually go, can we work within the constraints of our existing policy? And then that would enable us to actually take some steps, test something out, and then we can assess later. We can always make changes later if we wanted to. The last one is rather important. We wanted to make sure that this is recognized in a variety of forms, credit and non-credit. Again, there was a bit of fight in our institution about this healthy dialogue in our institution about this. Part of the question was looking at, well, everything should be credit. Absolutely everything should be credit. And while that is true for a lot of areas, sometimes people don't actually really care about the credit, they care about the learning. So remember that, all micro-credentials will still be assessed, but does it have to be credit? The other component of this was I'm from continuing studies. We have two different, this is, again, getting into the weeds of this a little bit, but it is far faster to go through the governance process for a non-credit offering than it is for a credit offering. So a credit offering might take 7 months just to go through governance. So fully formed, fully fledged, but then you have to go through curriculum committee revisions, and then EDCO revisions, and then board, right? A non-credit offering, we can expedite. We can go through the Dean's Council, then we can go through the Registrar's Office, and then we're out in the field. So if we want to respond really quickly in some cases, and credit isn't the most important thing, then we wanted to be able to do that. Okay. Coolio. I am going to leave some time at the end for some questions, just FYI. So if you have questions, I'm just going to say now's a great time to write it down as I very smoothly change slides. Okay, so putting the framework into practice. There was the fundamental question is, how do we actually do this? So great, we have fundamental principles in place, we have a structure, great. And then the question came in, who's going to do this? And as soon as someone says, okay, who wants to experiment or try something? That's when I'm like, my team will do it. We'll jump in there. We'll go for it. Again, part of that is continuing studies. Part of that's just who I am. But it's we decided to jump into this. But what we really need to do is to go, does this framework work? Are our fundamental assumptions, are they correct? Are we in line with what is actually going to be useful? But the only way to do that is actually just to try it, pay attention, and then refine. So we started a pilot project. I think in my 3 years at VCC, I've done about 5 or 6 pilot projects. I'm just like, we'll call it a pilot. And part of that is just because our president and our VPs like the word pilot as opposed to, I'm just going to change everything at VCC. Just a pilot. It's just a pilot. It mitigates risk. It's just a pilot. So we started in continuing studies because, again, there's a history of us doing short, focused programming. We said, all right, let's give ourselves 2 to 3 years, and we're going to develop about 2 to 4 targeted micro-credentials that aligned with this particular framework. So we had a particular scope in mind. Of course, it couldn't be just me working on this. So what we did is we formed a micro-credential working group. Of note, that working group had people from across the organization. And this is one of those things, remember that beautiful picture of the Gulf Islands I showed at the outset? This is where that metaphor really comes to play. Because if I had just made the working group my team, my experts on my team, then it would live and likely die only as a continuing studies initiative. But what we needed to do was develop something that would survive and thrive in the organization. We wanted the whole institution to get on board. So we had EDCO chair, curriculum chair, we had another dean, an AVP joined us as well, and everybody brought their best ideas forward. We focused on identifying the development process, how to operationalize the implementation of a micro-credential, and also the recognition components of micro-credentials. We wanted to make sure that we were fostering new developments. Some organizations, by the way, in British Columbia, sorry, I keep hitting my chest because that's what I do, but I'm realizing my mic is right there, so if it's coming out as a bad noise, please forgive me. Some institutions will take like a credential like a one-year program, and then they'll just divide it into 3 sections, and they'll call each of those 3 sections a micro-credential. That's fair and fine. What we didn't want to do that, because what we knew we were going to be doing is we would be hurting the enrollment pipeline for for that particular credential, which in our context is difficult, a difficult endeavor to undertake. So what we could do, though, is what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that people were putting forward new ideas. Where are the gaps in our current programming? Because, again, if we're really thinking with a student in mind, we already have a beautiful spectrum of programming at our institution, but we don't have a full spectrum, right? Between a certificate and a diploma, there's always something else that can go in there. Maybe there's a particular niche we haven't yet explored. Maybe there's an established field that needs some new stuff on the end. So we wanted to really push forward for new developments. We also wanted to make sure the system that we put in place actually proliferates the development of new micro-credentials. So, if we created a system that was an absolute nightmare to navigate, again, we would be killing the initiative at the outset. So we had to have something that would actually be reasonable to follow, straightforward, and guided. And then, as we do a lot, I can't recommend this enough, but we just regularly reviewed and improved upon our systems. And like I'm being with you today, being very open with our senior leaders, with my other deans, and just in saying, this isn't working. This is working. That one's not. So what are we learning from this, and how do we move forward? So what did we achieve? At the end of, we're actually just wrapping up that 3-year pilot right now. We've achieved a lot, and I'll go through what we've been able to accomplish and what we've learned here. So we did create a micro-credential development process, a review process, an approval process, and a marketing process. Oh, marketing. I don't know how it works here, but my goodness, we are weak on that area. So we really had to focus in on that. We also created, on that note, we created a centralized landing page for micro-credentials at VCC. One of the reasons is because micro-credentials is a new product in our market, like an educational product. If you go out and just ask anybody on the street, not many people are going to say, oh yeah, micro-credentials? Oh yeah, I got lots of... Not many people know what that is. So really what we're trying to do is convey, it's not a value to necessarily convey the title, oh, it's a micro-credential. It's more important that we go out and convey, here's the value for you as a student. Here's why it's helpful for you. And so a centralized landing page meant that we could better control our message at VCC about what value we aspire to add to our community through our micro-credential initiatives. We streamlined registrations. We have 2 registration systems at our institution. It's a little ugly, but the one we chose was thankfully the more efficient one. It's a lot easier for students to register for microcreds where and when they want. We have students taking our micro-credentials as far away as Malaysia and Ontario. So across Canada, but also internationally. So, and that's because we have a registration system that can actually support that. And then we made sure that, again, the idea of proliferating developments across the institution, we created a centralized resource area for any dean, any department head, any faculty member to be able to access. And it's really our way of saying, oh, you have an idea for a micro-credential? Great. Here's what it looks like to take your idea through to students in the classroom. That's what that looks like. So we have timelines, here's the steps, here are the people you need to talk to, all of that. We created and delivered 10 new micro-credentials, which for us is kind of like a miracle, a very small miracle. But it's been a very intense, but a very, very, very useful time for us. And then, of course, we also used the opportunity to look at what are all additional values that we can bring in here. And one of them was looking at how we can experiment with our delivery standards. What is the methodology that we're used to with online learning? If there's like an online supported micro-credential, what can we do to push ourselves a little forward? And thankfully we use that as an opportunity to do just that. So, some lessons from our framework itself. This is, I think, one of a very key one for us. Only create what's necessary and sufficient. I love those two words. Just what's necessary and sufficient. No more, no more. Especially if you're just trying this out. Like, you want to push yourself, you want to try something new, but we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of existing knowledge out there about what these are and how they can be impactful for your community. And there's also a lot of great governance, policy, and processes in place at our institutions that can help actually stimulate this. We can find a way through our existing systems without having to reinvent the wheel. We can save ourselves a lot of time if we just focus on those. Well, look at that. I precursed my thing. Here we go. So yes, where possible, operate within existing systems and the policy. It's a major, major time saver. Again, we think about, like, where is the fit for this particular offering within our community? Again, going back to that student-centered approach. How is this adding value to people in our community? So, do we have key performance indicators that we actually are attaching to this? That might be something as simple as enrollment, your registration, and your attrition trends. It might also be about, like, when are people registering for these things? Are people dropping out midway through a micro-credential? If you have 3 courses in your micro-credential, do you have like students dropping out after course 2? Why? So these are the types of things that, like, help inform what you're doing. Where is community engaging with what we're doing, and where are they not? Where are they pulling away from what we're doing? Also, if the training is short and focused, as we've been saying, that we think is the really principal characteristics of a micro-credential, does it add value? Like, let's be honest with ourselves. Does it really do these 3 things? One of the micro-credentials that we did, if you look at it just from the build out in the LMS, we use Moodle, but it's like, if you look at it from the build out in the LMS, it looks so sleek. It's beautiful. We interviewed, like, managers from, like, the Hilton and the Fairmont in Vancouver. It was just absolutely gorgeous. It was hospitality, and we had 0 registrants in this thing, 3 times over. 3 times over. And it is a nightmare to schedule. It is awful to schedule. But that tells us something, right? We missed the mark on this. And when we did an evaluation, what we realized was that we had developed that particular micro-credential to help people get introduced into the hospitality field in Vancouver so that they could find a job. What we didn't realize was that Vancouver was so desperate for people to work in the hospitality industry that they were like, "Are you alive and breathing? Fantastic, come on in. Let me just get you right in there to be our concierge at the front desk." So no one needed our training. No one needed our training. We didn't ask that question at the beginning of that particular micro-credentials development. We didn't ask that question. We should have. So now we ask that question at the beginning of our micro-credential developments, right? And again, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. By the way, if you want to take that microcred, let me know. I'll take it for free. It's beautiful. It is absolutely stunning. Lots of gorgeous, very expensive video work went into that. That all for naught, apparently. And the other thing is that pilots, I'll go back to that word, but and this might just be like a cultural thing in Vancouver, but sometimes it's hard to make changes in an organization because there is a lot of risk associated with that, institutional risk. There's reputational risk or what have you. But pilots definitely help to mitigate some of that risk for everyone involved. Like, if we really look at it, we're talking, like that hospitality one. Yeah, okay, so we lost like 100 grand. Okay, so we lost some money on that one. But we learned a lot of lessons. No one got hurt. No one died. It's okay. And really, it allowed us to go, you know what? That's okay. It becomes a very valuable lesson for us. A very expensive, but a very valuable lesson for us. But in terms of risk, it ends right around there. So keeping it as a pilot keeps it that way. The other great thing about that is that pilots are a wonderful opportunity to try out new process. And as a result, we can also look at how each particular pilot can help shape and mold the institutional strategy. We don't know exactly what the end result might be, but it's always that element of like, we are all agents for change, right? And when you have a good idea for something and you want to be part of like, oh, let's try this out, just remember that like you're actually part of the work of helping grow and flex your institutional strategy. And that's a beautiful thing to be able to be a part of. I keep coming back to this note because I love it, but like really actively reflect. That whole working group, half of our meeting each time was like, what's not working? What is working? Why? Actively reflect. Be brutally honest with yourself and your team. A trusted team, please. But like be brutally honest with yourself and your team so that you are making sure you're paying close attention to what's going on. And especially how all of what the minute detail that you're working on is still connecting with that broader purpose and value for the initiative as a whole. And again, like we have to be thinking about how is this landing with the student? How is this landing with the student? Is it really making a difference? Okay, so we have, good, we're all ready for part two? Part two, fantastic. So we had a framework in place. We learned some lessons. That's fantastic. But how are we actually going to carry this out? And this is one of the big things. I don't know about for here, but like, what's a typical timeline for like developing a course at UDST? Say the answer silently to yourself. No, it's like all institutions. I'll be frank. We're like when we talk about like developing a new program at VCC, a new program from like idea to students in class is 3 to 4 years. Yeah, it's like, oh man. So someone comes out and says, someone's like, but and then if it's a new course, sometimes a new course would take a year to get developed. So good job, UDST. Well done, very well done. Yes, you should be proud of that. And it is one of the things, again, I'm from continuing studies, so I'm like, let's go, let's move, because we need to respond. But if the institution came back to me and said, well, okay, yeah, great, so you want to do a microcred, so that's 2 to 3 courses, so that'll be about a year and a half before you start marketing. So a year to 2 years to get students in the microcred? What? So we realized that cannot work. That cannot work. So we knew that this was one of the areas that we needed to invest in, because if we were going to be responsive, we needed to make sure that we were developing in a timeline that actually got people into the thing as quickly as possible. If someone came to us with an idea, we wanted to be able to turn around and deliver it before that idea was no longer a valid idea, right? It's like cybersecurity. Oh, we should do cybersecurity. Yeah. 7 years later, hey, we got to cybersecurity. Yeah, we're good. And then the things have changed. People have moved on. Industry trends have changed. So with micro-credentials, what we looked for is a 4-month development timeline. So we wanted to go from 4 months from idea to students in the classroom. So that's the timeline that we've done. But oh my goodness, I have made a lot of people upset at my institution about this. But it has been transformative for that responsiveness piece about our micro-credentials. So we did this through a couple of things. I mean, we really just reverse engineered the problem. We knew that we had a development timeline issue at our hands, on our hands at the institution. So we looked at like, let's just reverse engineer this from like, what are the deliverables and how do we work backwards from that? So identified them, assigned them to a development team, made sure that team was regularly meeting, and then we also made sure that we were working with the other areas, the service areas in our institution, like procurement, risk, security, finance, to make sure that those systems, those relationships were working effectively so that we could move something through as fast as possible. Because everyone was like, what are you doing? Why are you asking me to turn this around in 5 days? I don't understand. How? How do I do this? So this is essentially, I'm really glad the screen is so big, thank you, because I realized too late that my slides, my ability to work with graphics is very limited, so please excuse me. But you can see the dots, here we are. So we started with initial consultation. This is just a basic time frame, but you can kind of see how it squeezes into 4 months. Start with consultation in like the beginning of May. We immediately focus on the structure and the design. So what are the competencies, what are the outcomes, and then we build from there. We begin drafting the content and we start connecting with industry reps, our subject matter experts, immediately. We start composing any things that are like that are going to take time. Video work, there's a lot of companies that do video in Vancouver, but good golly, trying to get them organized, find a studio to shoot in, work with our procurement office to get a contract in place in time, hire the people, write the script, and shoot. That's a lot of work just for that video. So we had to work on that as soon as we knew what the content pieces related to that video that would benefit from that video would be in place. Quick side note on the video. Why are you talking about video, Adrian? Well, great question. Thank you for asking. One of the parts that we had was that, remember that I said we wanted to really push what we were doing in terms of pushing ourselves in terms of what we said were standards of delivery. We wanted to challenge our methodology. We knew that if we were doing short form training, the particular ones that we were working with were for our the VFX and animation studios. They're working full time. We were doing an upskilling micro-credential. They could only access this in the evening. So we said, okay, you're gonna do a 3-hour class once a week, and you're gonna do 2 hours of work in the LMS throughout the week. So we needed the video component would be the flipped classroom approach, right? You do the methodology, you go through the theory, all through video, but we do studio tours, all on video, so that's why we had to push into that. As soon as, actually at the same time that the video's happening, we were working with our marketing team, getting it built up in the registration system, and then making sure that it's open and available as soon as possible for registrants. We finalize the content while we're marketing it, and then we build out the LMS in the very last bit, we test it out with our team, and then we welcome students on Monday, and we sigh, a deep, deep sigh of relief. So it was rapid. To do this, though, we had to move beyond the model that we typically approach. Again, like from a VCC perspective, when we develop content, it's like, great, you're already working a full-time job. How's the side of your desk looking? Would you like to develop a course just when you're bored, you know? And that's part of the reason it takes so long to get something done up, right? And oftentimes, that's the only way things get developed. And that's not necessarily bad. It just doesn't work within, if we want to be responsive, I think we need to re-question this. So what we started is looking at the team structure. We knew that learning design had to be centered. Like, it all starts with learning design. But the same person who's doing learning design needs to know who they need to meet with, when they need to meet with. So we knew that that learning designer also had to be really good at project management. It's a bit of a unicorn, if you're really thinking about it, but there are people out there who are like great learning designers and organized. And if you can get some of those, then those people, we have essentially built our development teams around that person. They then connect, as you can see, with subject matter experts. DigiBC, by the way, is just the association that we worked with who oversees VFX animation and video game studios. So we work with industry subject matter experts. The learning designer project manager also works with the home program coordinator, the home PC. That's the person in whose area the micro-credential will eventually land. This is a centralized development team structure. So they'll develop content for anywhere in my team, anywhere in the institution. So because, again, they'll link with the subject matter experts as they need to. And then, of course, like a videographer, LMS designer, et cetera. But this made the team lean and able to meet regularly, able to get, the CS administration is myself and my associate directors and my associate registrar, who are essentially just guiding and making sure that the project manager and learning designer had everything she needed to get the work done. So making sure that she was adequately supported in her work. And then the third piece is collaboration. Collaboration is something that I could talk a lot about, but I'm going to keep myself very, very focused on this. This is part where it's like, how do we intersect? How do we add value to our students? One of the big things is like, well, then we need to make sure that we're actually developing micro-credentials where people, where industry says, I need to train up my team, or I need to get more employees who look like this, or this part of our community really needs more trained people in this way. So those are the people that we collaborate with, those associations, those business leaders in the community. And we start with what are the trends that are impacting that are impacting their own needs. And of course, we start with inquiry. We came to them initially, when we first started this, we came with ideas like, oh, well, here's what we have that we could customize for you, and we'll put that into a micro-credential for you. What we realized was that when we actually listened, we were saying like, well, what do you actually need? They were telling us something very, very different. And we took a moment with that because we were like, well, this means it's going to take us longer to develop this. But at the same time, if they know that we are paying attention to what they're telling us, then suddenly we are also cultivating buy-in on the other end for our graduates. Like, industry will see the value in this if we make sure the value that they're sharing with us is reflected in the content, in the design, and the delivery of the micro-credential in question. So we were like, so it changes our perspective. It helped us go, oh, we actually need to really make sure we're not just setting up a program advisory committee for a one-day session with us. We're going to have regular check-ins with you. We'll draft something, we'll send it back to you, we'll get your input, we'll draft another draft, and we'll send it back to you, and then we'll get it back. And then, so that way, by the end, they are very confident in our ability to respond to their needs. Of course, we also had to make sure that we're always working with the group to move the project forward, so we're always connecting with the basics of project management, right? Like, okay, so what's happening in the next meeting? Who's responsible for this? Who's doing this? Okay, great. And then let's make sure that's captured in our action list, and then we can move forward from there. And of course, next, make sure that we're making space for ideas, because what is one of the most valuable things we learned when collaborating is that we don't know what we don't know. And if we're paying attention to our community, then we're going to be in a much better space to go, oh, wait a sec, that's a different idea, but that's a great idea. Let's take that up after we're done this project. And that has actually snowballed into a bunch of new ideas for us, new training for our community, which is just fabulous. So what we learned with our rapid development, big time, start with that, clarify what the problem is you're going to fix. Going back to that hospitality one, that's the big lesson that we learned there, right? We didn't know exactly what problem we're trying to fix here. But other ones where we've identified this, what need is this hitting in our community? Be laser focused on that. Make sure that industry partners, community partners, are engaged in the design and the product, and stay connected with them, because there's additional conversations that can come about that. The development system needs to be thought of as a sustainable development system. How do we ensure that the institution, how do we change this? For us, what we've landed on is we used this rapid development model to go, okay, there's actually a payoff for the organization. We can actually make this investment that you have in our development team actually pay off. We can do this through post-degree diplomas or diplomas, where if we apply the same principle, which we've done now, we can now develop a 2-year degree in 6 months. We can get it out to market in a year, and then a year total from idea to students in the classroom, which is, again, lightning fast for our institution. And then suddenly now there's revenue generating from that to offset the development costs in a very sustainable manner. So thinking about that from a sustainability perspective, we can't always expect funding from the ministry or a grant or the goodwill of someone with a very large desk to be able to support these. We have to make sure that the initiatives can stand on their own. New learning products, they take time to align with the needs of your audience. If it's a new offering, again, not many people still know what a micro-credential is. But if you're saying, I'm providing focused training to upskill this particular role, like pipeline managers in the animation field, then that's actually a great way to link with the community there. Reflect and adapt, you know me now. Okay, multiple feedback loops. Make sure that there is, are we giving ourselves that formative feedback in multiple ways about the project and about the content that we're developing. And of course, stay curious, absolutely stay curious. For those who are interested or have experience in this field or are interested in exploring niche ways to really get into micro-credential developments in your own context, that is absolutely essential. And then, of course, making sure that the alignment of each particular micro-credential can point back to those fundamental principles that really guide this, because that's our way of really tracking the KPIs for the initiative as a whole. Are these micro-credentials really doing the work that we wanted them to do? Okay. Oh, perfect timing. Great. Okay, great. We're good. We want to start with this. Let's evaluate. So just to take that final step back, just to wrap up this presentation, what I want to do is look back at how did we do and what did we learn here? So let's go back to the original questions that we asked. What are micro-credentials? How are they useful? And how can they be effectively implemented at VCC? So with micro-credentials, as I've gone over here, and I do realize I'm giving you a lot and it's very broad, but there will be time for questions, and I'll be kicking around for the rest of the day. If you have more questions, please just come up and ask. So we realized that the structure does fundamentally work. We were really dubious about our own limit at 100 hours, but now that we've lived with it for a bit, we're like, that's actually good. Because guess what? If you have something that, no, this needs to be 200 hours, for us, we can just go, great, then stack 2 micro-credentials together. Stack them together. It becomes a short certificate. It's fine. It doesn't really matter. But it enables us that the shorter limit, the structure helps us to hit that flexibility piece, and we have found a lot of positive response back from our students about that. We have the core criteria. We know that the guiding principles are there to help us understand what we need to put in place for each one, and then also the constraints. We know a lot more about what our institution is slow on and quick with. And that's fine. I'm not going to, my procurement team, bless them, they are going to take the time that they need. So that's great. That just means that I know I need to give them 3 months heads up on whatever so that they have the time to do their work. But at least I know that now because we've gone through it 10 times with them, right? How are they useful? There we go. So how are they useful? Student and industry impact. We are running multiple surveys with our students. We're running, yes, after you're done your course one, absolutely. After you're done the micro-credential one. How is this impactful for you? Did it help you get the job? If so, how long are you staying in that job? Another one is, of course, with industry. We're asking the same question. So you hired a few people who took our micro-credential. How's that going? Are you satisfied with them? Are there outcomes that you wish we had included? This tells us a lot of stuff. It gives us, yes, the numbers. We know how many registrants and graduates we're producing, but how does that translate into the impact we desire for our community with this initiative, right? So we have to make sure that we're paying attention to those metrics as well. And then how can they be effectively implemented at the college? Sustainability is so key. We develop things, by the way, micro-credentials are, they're not, we receive no funding from the government to support the tuition of these. So the tuition has to, each micro-credential has to run in a cost recovery manner. So, which is great, by the way. I would argue it's great because students will pay for something that they see value in, and they'll also do the opposite. They will not register in ones for which they do not see any value. And that's a great piece of learning right there. The training is niche and focused, and also it helps us broaden our appeal. Again, we already have a brilliant spectrum of programming at our college. We really do. It's really hands-on training. It's lovely, lovely training. But there's always those little niches that we can't explore because we don't have a vehicle for that. And that's where we're finding micro-credentials can really be helpful. Jumping in on that little bit of upskilling that's required. Just let's make sure it stays updated and relevant and timely. Our initial principles, we did achieve, I think, almost all of these. They were recognized and endorsed. Yes, we have metrics to prove that. They're valid and high quality. Yes, our feedback from industry has indicated that that has been achieved. Verifiable and or digitally accessible, it's in process. Some of our micro-credentials have badges attached. What we found interesting was that not all industry partners care at all about digital badges. Others do. We're still really investigating this question. I'm leading that initiative of our institution about digital badges because there's also a lot of work around recognition, prior learning recognition as well. and helping the student acknowledge themselves and their own journey. That can be very valuable. So that's definitely in process for us. Customizable and flexible, yes, we nailed that one. Is it responsive? Yes. We are able to get things out fairly quickly, and it also enables us to make sure that when the need comes up, we can get students in that class fairly soon. Is it mission focused? Yes, but with an asterisk. Because, again, as I mentioned earlier, there was no mission related to micro-credentials explicitly. Now, micro-credentials, because of the work our team has done on these, we have now woven in micro-credentials into our strategic planning document. Because we see that, yes, we also need this in. And again, that's that part of like, we can be part of that change. If we just try it, we can be part of that change. So, finally, lessons worth sharing. I would encourage, this is my broad encouragement to you all, is to focus intently on the value to the learner and the community. Micro-credentials can be both a product, like an educational product, like a certificate or a diploma, but they can also be an opportunity for your institution or your department to try something different, to try something new, to engage in a way that you might not have otherwise done. Wherever you are is a great place to start. It's the right place to start because you're starting from the place that you know your context, you know your questions, and that is exactly the kind of the groundwork that you need to move forward. And stay curious, fail fast, and fail forward. It sounds trite, but I actually think I stand by this a lot. Like, again, the risk is mitigated within a pilot. So it's okay to fail. It really is okay to fail. Sorry, this is not me saying what it should be an institutional policy here. I'm just saying from my own perspective. This is failing fast is something that we found really helpful because it opens us up to take risks. And that has yielded many, many results. I'm going to leave you with a few questions to consider as you go through the rest of your day, but also the weeks ahead. How do you see micro-credentials adding value to your students and your community? And is there some aspect of micro-credentials from what I've shared today, what was possibly shared yesterday? I wasn't able to attend because I was in flight, but that piqued your interest. Something that really stood out to you, like, oh, that. I would encourage you all to just write that down. Write it down. Don't lose your questions because those questions are the valuable starting place. They're like the coals that really light up into the fire of inquiry, and just follow that inquiry. I have to say, it's like the micro-credentials can be such a valuable and wonderful, wonderful opportunity to try something, to explore, and really that most valuable piece that I can really share with you is what we have found is when we are paying attention to the question of how can this particular thing, this micro-credentials, how can it meet the needs of my community, then we really start ourselves on the road that opens us up to so much. And then you start to see those connections. If we're going from that, like, yes, I'm developing it here in my department, to, no, UDST is doing this, and Doha is doing this, and larger and larger. And you open yourself up to so much more. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. My email's up there. Feel free to toss me an email. It'd be a couple business days before I'm able to respond. But thank you very much for your time and your attention. And I wish you the best in the rest of the day. Thank you.
We'd like to take a few questions.
Absolutely, happy
if
to.
anybody has any questions. Yes, please, Doctor.
Well, thank you so much for the very informative presentation this morning. I've got a couple of things I just want more clarification on, please. So you mentioned that on one hand, you developed your own processes, like a marketing process, a design process, and so on. But at the same time, you also recommend to stay within the institutional policies and processes. So I'm not sure how to put these two together.
Yeah.
The second point, you also gave the example about the MC that you developed. It was very beautiful and shiny, but at the end there was no one interested in that. So does that mean you didn't do any form of LMA at the beginning? And Then you said the whole process should take 4 months from idea to students in the classroom. Will that include the LMA as well within those 4 months? Thank you.
Yeah, great questions, thank you. To your first, yeah, there is a tension between the processes that we have established in the institution and where the gaps are. I would say that the process that I outlined that we adjusted, they weren't new approaches. They were, like we already have marketing processes in place, we have development processes in place, but what we needed to do was tweak them, is probably the better way to put it. Some of the ones, like for marketing, all we did is we just shortened the gap between certain things that happened. So it was relatively small. The development process, as I shared, the rapid development process, was the most dramatic of the changes that we implemented. So we took the same principles of development, and what we did is we just forced it into a much more compressed timeline. The change that was really dramatic was of course shaping up the team and then being able to fund that team for those developments. So it was a matter of going wherever possible, don't mess with the process. So for instance, we did not change the credential policy at our institution because that would have just been a nightmare. So we actually, that would have delayed us by about 3 years, just on that alone. We also didn't, because we were able to, in the guiding principles, have something that could be like a non-credit, we were able to work through our governance process quite quickly. We just decided to do for all new micro-credentials that had to get out in market really quickly. We said, well, let's use the non-credit approach first. We can make it credit later. Let's start with non-credit so that we can get through the governance in a matter of weeks as opposed to a matter of months. So I guess what I did not share was all the ones that we didn't change. You know what I mean? Like procurement, finance, those were all the same. To your second question, yeah, the shiny micro-credential that went nowhere. Yes, we had, the issue was our team had assumptions around what the community was going to ask for. We did ask, as part of that initial process, we did ask the SMEs that we were targeting, and they were like, oh yeah, we absolutely need people who have this type of content. We were like, great. So what happened was, the people that we happened to ask formed a very kind of like tight group. It was almost like an echo chamber. So we didn't seek opinions that varied from that initial perspective. It's that bias check, you know, where it's like I come in and I have certain assumptions, and then I hear someone say, oh yeah, those are my assumptions too. Great, we must be right. And that was our mistake. What we should be looking for is people who would go against what we're actually saying. To the third question there about how, do we do that kind of like, is there actually some form of inquiry done earlier? Some of the ideas we actually start with, we might trickle in the initial assessment of a particular idea in the months that precede the actual development cycle. So what we've learned to do is start to ask those questions, start to connect with industry partners a little bit earlier, and a variety of them, so we're not just asking the same people over and over. Does that help answer the question?
Great,
Ish? Okay.
Thank you. Doctor.
Thank you, Adrian. It's all right. Good morning. Thank you, Adrian, for the nice presentation. First of all, I don't think Canada has a national qualification framework as a whole, but there is a qualification framework, not on the national level. Where would these fit on that qualification framework? Because from what you said, I think it's not for credit what you guys developed. It's because of the time range and the process, 4 months, and according to your timeline, 2 to 3 years to develop a program. So it's not an academic, not a credit-based. So is that right?
Correct. I'll answer the second one first. Yeah.
So where is it on the national qualification framework?
Yeah. There is no national qualification, and that's one of the problems. Like the education, the ministries of education are provincially mandated. So, and I would say, by the way, if I was to create a new country, I would do a national certification qualification framework. I've been looking very closely at the UK and Scotland. A lot of other countries have a national qualification. That is a framework that definitely supports the students far better, I think, than doing it provincially. For the non-credit credit, just so, yeah, it's a great point. Like when we're designing a micro-credential, we'll have all the components that can enable it to be a credit-bearing offering if we wish. So at our institution, we have this lovely, this is kind of us finding our route. We were able to run it through as a non-credit offering at the outset, and then we can run it fully through governance. Even while it's running as a non-credit offering, we can actually apply, we can run it through governance so that it can be a credit, it can mold into a credit-bearing one later. The credit-bearing one would fit in with the province's framework. The province's framework right now is like they're coming out with draft 2, I think, fairly soon, and we were always paying attention to like the initial draft that our province had put forward, and mostly it's just about like what is the role of the institution, what's the role of the province, what's the role of industry, and what are some of the structural components that we have to do. So we've been designing with that in mind. But in terms of nationally, it's the practice is still a bit all over the place. It's, yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
One more question. Yes, please. Is there a reason why Quebec did not take your micro-credentials?
Sorry, is there a reason?
You said that your micro-credentials were from, people signed up for it from Malaysia to Ontario, but you stopped at Quebec and Montreal. I was like, why? Is there a reason?
Our reach doesn't, we don't have anyone on our team who translates into French. I think that's part of it, okay. But yeah. It's not a intentional line.
Thank you so much. We appreciated the presentation and certainly enjoyed your sense of humor. It's wonderful. Thank you. A question from our community where we have also implemented a lot of external micro-credentials into our existing programs. So what do you think as potential opportunities and challenges we're trying to develop our own credentials while at the same time implementing external micro-credentials?
And just one question of clarification. Are you licensing these from externally?
I think we are embedding them in our regular degree programs.
Okay. Yeah, it's a, I mean, I think one of the nice things about looking outside for like existing micro-credentials that you might be able to incorporate within your own organization is a very fast way to do it. I think it allows that on I would frame that as a great strategy for being responsive to your community's needs, because if someone else is already doing it, why reinvent it? We've actually licensed a few ourselves, and larger programs too, for that very reason. I think the reason I asked about the licensing is like sometimes the intellectual property rights of an external micro-credential might preclude you from being able to explore similar or other branches of a similar micro-credential later. So, but that's I would say look at the licensing agreement for that consideration. But otherwise it's like it's whatever helps the institution to be able to respond in a timely manner with the training that is needed. So in some cases, if it's found externally, that is by far, I'd say, the more efficient process. If it's done internally, then we encounter the question of like, okay, so how are we going to support this? Is this just a one-off? Do we do this every year? And it's just those questions to explore. The great thing with doing it internally is that you can be very laser focused on customizing it per the needs that you've identified. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Adrian. Thank you for all your comments and insightful
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Honestly, I think UDSD has succeeded in connecting with industry. We have PAC committee members that come on semester